How can ancient wisdom help us unravel today's mysteries? The answer lies in the art of asking questions. And no one did that better than Socrates. Over 2 millennia ago, Socrates developed a method of inquiry so effective that it's now used in leadership training, coaching sessions, and even legal trials. He didn't give answers, he asked questions. And that's precisely where the power lies. Questioning is often more transformative than answering. While the modern world screams for quick answers, Socrates whispers an uncomfortable truth. Have you ever questioned the question itself? Today, we face complex dilemmas, ethical decisions about technology, identity crises, polarization, existential anxiety. And instead of reflection, we drown in ready-made opinions. But Socrates did the opposite. He didn't tell you what to think. He forced you to think. His method was simple and brutal, asking a sequence of questions until the person realized they didn't know as much as they thought. And that's where true wisdom begins. In the discomfort of doubt. Are you sure about what you believe? Where do your ideas come from? What if everything you think you know is just a shadow on the wall of the cave? The Socratic method exposes fragile certainties. It breaks masks. And more than anything, it teaches us to think without clinging to immediate conclusions. In a world where everyone talks, the silence of a good question is revolutionary. Do you trust your own ideas, or have you just learned to repeat them? What if what you call an opinion is just disguised programming? Socrates showed that every complex problem hides a poorly formulated question, and that before finding solutions. We must learn to ask better questions. Today, with AI, social media, climate crises, and inner conflicts, maybe the way out isn't to know more, but to doubt better. The lost art of asking, the Socratic method, and today's challenges. In a world obsessed with immediate answers, we've forgotten something essential. The quality of our questions defines the depth of our understanding. Socrates knew this over 2,000 years ago. Instead of teaching ready-made truths, he did the opposite. He immersed others in questions. He didn't teach content, he taught how to think. His method, known as the Socratic meutic, consisted of a guided dialogue in which the teacher does not impose ideas but leads the interlocutor to discover, by themselves, the contradictions in their own thinking. The premise was simple and bold. Truth is not something you receive. It is something you unearth. Socrates believed that we all carry fragments of truth within us. But we are buried under illusions, inherited beliefs, and fragile certainties. The role of philosophy, then, was not to fill the mind, but to deconstruct it. To remove the excess, the arrogance, the noise. That's why his method always begins with a disconcerting question. And if you don't know how to answer, even better, it means something new might be born from it. Why does this matter today? We are surrounded by information. But an excess of data doesn't produce clarity, it often creates confusion. We are more connected, yet more lost. More informed, but less wise. And perhaps, in the face of so much complexity, the secret is not to seek more answers, but to learn how to ask the right questions. The Socratic method offers us exactly that. A way of thinking that does not surrender to the obvious. An attitude toward life that does not accept the first explanation. A perspective that distrusts certainties and seeks the essence. Imagine applying this to ethical decisions about artificial intelligence, to fake news, to the search for identity amidst social pressures, to the anxiety triggered by unattainable standards. The Socratic method is, at its core, a guide for navigating chaotic times with clarity. It teaches us that truth is not what is shouted the loudest. It is what withstands all questioning. Why is it so hard to reach the truth? We live in the information age, yet paradoxically, it has never been so difficult to discern what is true. The problem isn't a lack of data, it's the way our minds process, distort, and avoid confrontation with reality. The human mind is not a truth-seeking machine. It doesn't naturally seek what is real, it seeks what comforts, confirms, and protects the self. Socrates' philosophy, centered on the art of questioning, remains relevant because it forces us to face what we often avoid: our unexamined beliefs, automatic thoughts, and the fragility of our perception. Modern psychology confirms much of what he intuited over 2,000 years ago. Inherited beliefs. From an early age, we're taught what is right or wrong, what we should seek or fear. These ideas don't come from free thinking, but from social, familial, and cultural conditioning. Aaron Beck identified that many of our thoughts stem from core beliefs formed in childhood, often unquestioned. They act like lenses, distorting our perception without our awareness. As Socrates asked, "Is this idea truly mine, or something I accepted without reflection?" Emotional attachment to ideas. We don't think to discover the truth, we think to protect what we already believe. The phenomenon of cognitive dissonance shows how we reject information that contradicts our beliefs, even when the evidence is clear. When confronted in this way, we experience inner discomfort, dissonance. Acceptance and commitment therapy reveals that when we are fused with our thoughts, those thoughts control us. We only begin to find freedom when we realize that our thoughts are not absolute truths, they are merely mental events. To ease the discomfort, the brain tends to rationalize or ignore the new evidence. It clings to narratives that support the identity of the self. Socrates challenged this by exposing contradictions, not to accelerated thinking. Our current mental pace is driven by haste and superficiality. Daniel Kahneman described two modes of thinking, one fast and automatic, the other slow and analytical. The first dominates our daily life. The Socratic method demands activation of the second, thinking with calm, weighing arguments, examining ideas deeply. In addition, neuroscience studies show that fragmented attention impairs clarity. The overload of digital stimuli reduces our capacity for sustained focus, essential for critical thinking. To truly understand something, we need time, silence, and focus, all of which are scarce in modern life. Fear of conflict. Thinking differently creates discomfort. Often, we prefer to maintain superficial harmony rather than question ideas that support our groups, traditions, or relationships. We avoid difficult discussions, which is why conformity, even in the face of error, is so common. Threat response, social neuroscience, Lieberman, 2013. When someone challenges our beliefs, the brain reacts as if facing a physical threat, activating the same regions used for real danger. Classic studies by Solomon Asch show that even when we know something is wrong, we tend to agree with the group just to avoid confrontation. So, we choose silence over truth, even if it means living in illusion. Socrates faced death because he refused to abandon questioning. For him, truth was more valuable than comfort. This posture invites us to endure the necessary friction required for growth. Confused language, shallow thought. Much of our inner confusion arises from poorly defined words. When we can't clearly express what we think, perhaps we aren't truly thinking, only reacting. As Vygotsky affirmed, language is not merely a communication tool, it is the very structure of thought. Those who speak poorly, think poorly. Those who don't define, don't understand. Wittgenstein once said, "The limits of my language are the limits of my world." Socrates began with the basics. What is justice? What is courage? He knew that without clarity in language, there can be no clarity in thought, and without clarity, no truth. Seeking truth is not a neutral intellectual exercise, it's a battle against the mental mechanisms that protect us from discomfort. Socratic philosophy and modern psychology converge on one essential point: there is no growth without confrontation. Thinking hurts. Changing one's mind takes courage. But not thinking, or merely repeating ready-made ideas, comes at a greater cost. Living a life without clarity. Socrates did not offer answers, he offered questions that liberate. And today, more than ever, we must relearn how to ask. Because truth does not shout, it whispers, waiting for someone brave enough to hear it. The method in action, when the question matters more than the answer. The Socratic method is simple in appearance but profoundly challenging in essence. It doesn't deliver ready-made answers, it trains us to think. More than just a path to knowledge, it's an invitation to examine, deconstruct, and, when necessary, abandon what we believe we know. Rather than offering comfort, it forces us to confront the limits of our certainties. Socrates didn't seek to persuade, he sought to reveal. Not to others, but to ourselves, how often our ideas rest on fragile foundations. This method comes to life when we look at its practical effects. In Plato's dialogues, we see Socrates questioning generals, poets, and politicians, men considered wise, experienced, and full of authority. But when questioned, they stumble. A general cannot define courage. A poet struggles to explain beauty. And that doesn't make them ignorant, it makes them human. Socrates knew that true ignorance isn't not knowing, it's thinking you know. His weapon was a well-placed question. Just one. Capable of dismantling an entire mental structure. And this kind of deconstruction still happens, just wearing different clothes. When Martin Luther King Jr. wrote from jail that creative tension was necessary to awaken America's conscience, he was explicitly invoking Socrates. By confronting unjust laws with moral questions, is it right to obey what is unjust? King challenged an entire society to think again. To do what Socrates would call an examination of the soul. In a modern therapist's office, the Socratic spirit still lives. When a psychologist asks, "What's the evidence for this thought?" or "Are you reacting to facts or to your interpretation of them?" they are doing what Socrates would do, dismantling emotional certainties to make room for new clarity. In therapy, this process has a name: cognitive restructuring. But at its core, it's the same ancient wisdom, the kind that understands that clarity comes from confrontation, not avoidance. Even in a classroom, when a good teacher challenges students to think for themselves, to reject easy answers, to explore contradictions and seek more precise definitions, the Socratic method is at work. And in the difficult conversations of daily life, personal decisions, relationship conflicts, or moral dilemmas, it can mean the difference between reacting impulsively and acting with awareness. To question with courage, to listen without haste, and to accept that we might be wrong, that is rare. It is uncomfortable. But that's where truth begins. In a world obsessed with being right, the greatest act of freedom may be this: to allow ourselves to doubt, honestly. If you've made it this far, perhaps something in you is also seeking that kind of clarity. Take the next step. Question more, speak less. Try applying this mindset to everyday life, and watch how the answers shift when you change the question. If this kind of reflection resonates with you, subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments. After all, thinking together always takes us further. The wisdom of doubt, the method that helps you think. Here's a powerful secret of the Socratic method that can deeply transform the way you approach problems and complex questions. True wisdom lies in recognizing your own ignorance and embracing doubt as a path to knowledge. This insight, which Socrates summed up in his famous maxim, "I know that I know nothing," frees us from the trap of seeking quick solutions or absolute certainties, something all too common and dangerous in the modern world. When we accept that we don't have all the answers, we create space for authentic dialogue, constant questioning, and genuine discovery. In other words, the Socratic method teaches us that the starting point for solving a complex problem is not to rush to an answer, but to learn how to ask the right questions. Questions that deconstruct assumptions, reveal contradictions, and shed light on what was previously hidden. By shifting the focus from answers to questions, we move from automatic problem solvers to conscious explorers. That's the transformative power of the method. It doesn't offer shortcuts. It invites you to think more deeply, to question with courage, and to grow with each doubt that arises. Imagine you're facing an important dilemma: changing careers, ending a relationship, or making a risky decision. The natural tendency is to seek a quick answer, a ready-made piece of advice, or to follow what feels right. The Socratic method proposes something different: pause and interrogate your own assumptions. You might start with questions like, why exactly do I want to make this decision? What am I assuming to be true here? What if this belief is wrong? Where is this fear coming from? What am I trying to avoid or prove with this choice? These questions don't bring automatic answers. They open space. And it's in that space that wisdom begins to form. In our relationships with others, the Socratic method is also a powerful key. Instead of responding with judgment, try responding with an honest question. If someone says something controversial or aggressive, you can ask, "What exactly do you mean by that? How did you come to that conclusion? Would you consider another possibility?" This approach not only avoids unnecessary conflict, it transforms the dialogue. It invites the other person to reflect. It makes the conversation more human, more profound, more transformative. From a psychological point of view, this aligns perfectly with therapies like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and modern Socratic therapy, replacing automatic thoughts with examined thoughts. In other words, trading reaction for awareness. When you become someone who can ask before reacting, investigate before concluding, and listen before defending your position, you don't just think better, you become wiser. Because wisdom isn't about collecting ideas, it's about refining the mind until it sees with more clarity and less noise. And if you cultivate this habit, questioning deeply, reflecting before reacting, digging into ideas until you reach their roots, you'll find that many of the problems that once seemed overwhelming become simpler. Not because the world has changed, but because you've learned to think with greater sharpness. This is more than a teaching technique or rhetorical strategy, it's an existential posture. A way of living that chooses curiosity over rigidity, listening over haste, and the lightness of doubt over the pride of certainty. So if this Socratic perspective stirred something in you, keep exploring. Question with courage. Doubt with intelligence. And remember, the best answers are not the ones that close a conversation, but the ones that open new possibilities. If this search for clarity resonated with you, subscribe to the channel, leave in the comments a question that intrigues you, and join us in discovering how philosophy can still illuminate the most human dilemmas of our time. The wisdom of doubt, the method that helps you think. Here's a powerful secret of the Socratic method, one that can deeply transform the way you approach problems and complex questions. True wisdom lies in recognizing your own ignorance and embracing doubt as a pathway to knowledge. Socrates summed this up in his famous maxim, "I know that I know nothing." This idea liberates us from the trap of chasing quick fixes or clinging to absolute certainties, habits that are all too common and dangerous in today's world. When we accept that we don't have all the answers, we open space for real dialogue, honest inquiry, and true discovery. In essence, the Socratic method teaches that the starting point for solving complex problems isn't to rush toward an answer, but to learn how to ask the right questions. Questions that deconstruct assumptions, reveal contradictions, and illuminate what was previously hidden. By shifting the focus from answers to questions, we stop being passive problem solvers and become conscious explorers. That's the true power of the method. It doesn't offer shortcuts. It invites us to think more deeply, to question with courage, and to grow through uncertainty. Imagine you're facing a big decision, changing careers, ending a relationship, or stepping into something unknown. The natural instinct is to seek a quick answer, a piece of advice, or to follow whatever feels right. But the Socratic method offers another path. Pause and examine your assumptions. Start with questions like, why exactly do I want to make this decision? What am I assuming to be true here? What if this belief is wrong? Where is this fear coming from? What am I trying to avoid or prove with this choice? These questions won't give you immediate answers. They create space. And it's in that space that wisdom begins to grow. In our interactions with others, the Socratic method is just as powerful. Instead of reacting with judgment, respond with a sincere question. If someone says something controversial or emotional, try asking, "What do you mean by that? How did you come to that conclusion? Have you ever considered another perspective?" This approach doesn't just avoid conflict, it transforms the conversation. It invites reflection. It makes dialogue more human, more honest, more alive. From a psychological perspective, this aligns perfectly with cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, and modern Socratic-based therapies, replacing automatic thoughts with examined thoughts. In other words, replacing reaction with awareness. When you become someone who questions before reacting, investigates before concluding, and listens before defending your position, you don't just think better, you become wiser. Because wisdom isn't about collecting ideas, it's about refining the mind until it sees with clarity and calm. As you build this habit, questioning more deeply, reflecting before reacting, digging into beliefs until you reach their roots, many of the problems that once overwhelmed you will begin to feel lighter. Not because the world has changed, but because you have. This is more than a thinking method or rhetorical trick. It's a way of being. A mindset that chooses curiosity over rigidity, listening over haste, and the humility of doubt over the arrogance of certainty. So if this Socratic perspective stirred something in you, keep exploring. Question boldly. Doubt wisely. And remember, the best answers are not the ones that end the conversation, but the ones that open new paths. If this search for clarity resonates with you, subscribe to the channel, leave a question in the comments that challenges you, and join us as we explore how ancient philosophy can still illuminate the most deeply human dilemmas of our time. Summary and conclusion. The Socratic method, born in Athens in the 5th century before Christ, remains remarkably relevant today. It teaches us that the pursuit of truth begins with doubt, and that asking the right questions is more valuable than rushing to quick answers. Socrates didn't offer ready-made formulas, but a path to examine beliefs, dismantle illusions, and dig beneath the surface to uncover what is hidden. In the modern world, this practice proves essential. Amid polarized opinions, misinformation, and impulsive decisions, applying the Socratic method, whether in conversations, personal decisions, therapy, or debates, is a powerful way to gain clarity and authenticity. It fosters critical thinking, self-knowledge, and genuine dialogue precisely because it invites us to let go of the pride of being right and embrace the humility of wanting to understand. By returning to this way of thinking, we learn to listen better, argue more clearly, and see beyond appearances. After all, as Socrates showed us, sometimes what H.